Invio, we make enterprise SaaS for clinical trials. Now, clinical trials are funny because they're incredibly important for things like bringing new medicine to market, but they're also really important for addressing emerging health threats like multiple drug-resistant bacteria. And so while they exist at the leading edge of research, they tend to exist way, way, way behind the trailing edge of technology. And that's pretty frustrating. So I'm Dema Poppa, CEO of Invio. Before Invio, I was research manager for a 40-hospital emphysema study. And I was incredibly frustrated by the challenges of doing research across all these hospitals. One of the things that you see is that the hospitals are responsible for seeing the patients, collecting the data, and transferring it to you as the sponsor of that study, but you don't have direct control of it. And so that's really an issue that keeps research managers up at night, because without being able to access that information, you only have a certain sense of the quality, and so you start to wonder, well, if it's not good quality, is the FDA going to accept it? Will my study run over schedule, over budget? There's a lot of issues that they really wrestle with. And so the way that the industry has historically dealt with that is by sending your research teams out to every hospital every few weeks to sit down and look at a binder like this, full of patient data. It's incredibly labor intensive, it costs a lot of money in terms of travel, and it doesn't even really do a great job of addressing the challenges of maintaining good data quality. So, in fact, those fears are often realized. We see that more than 80% of trials run behind schedule, which as a rule means they're behind or over budget as well. And a lot of that money that's spent on the clinical trials process is wasted. In fact, we estimate that about a third of the research clinical trial data management costs could be recovered with a better solution. So, that's where we come in. A lot of people were waiting for that binder throw. So we have replaced that gross binder with a cloud-based platform for sharing medical research data in a regulatory compliant way from between the participating hospitals and the Central Research Administration. So the advantage to this is that instead of having to travel to the site on a regular basis, your research teams can stay home and work from their office and access the information that they would need to access on site. We don't stop with just that though. I mean, that's really just the ground floor for us. I should say, but wait, there's more. So the more is that we actually leverage some of the really cool aspects of getting this information into a computer system to attack a lot of these other cost drivers that are related to clinical trials. So one thing that was always really challenging for me as a research manager was understanding what's actually happening at the sites, what's actually happening with my field teams. And so we have audit trails, which are nice because they comply with the regulatory requirement, but they also give insight into what your field teams are doing when they're actually operating on the research. We also use computer vision to make sure that all of the content in the system is searchable. We can integrate with electronic health record systems, which is normally kind of another pocket that your research team has to look into to find the information they need and consolidate it into our electronic binder solution. And we can automate some of the data verification processes that drain a lot of time and resources for clinical trials. So I did mention regulatory compliant. We do a lot of FDA-related research on the platform, but we do not need FDA approval. You might be asking, well, it seems like cloud-based document management seems to make sense. There's obviously a financial need in the space for it. Why hasn't the solution existed before? Well, technology was there within the last couple of years. Financial need existed, but regulatory backing wasn't quite there. That changed a couple of years ago when FDA issued guidance saying, hey, we want researchers to do as much of this remotely as they practicably can. And so that's actually the space where the industry is right now. We're trying to figure out what is that best way to do this remote monitoring. How do we cut down on the amount of work that goes into the data verification processes? These things that are really costly but don't actually do that much to assure quality and help us get that approval from FDA so we can bring our product to market. So that's what we do. We're hoping to be the best practice, and we think that we can make a significant impact. Instead of study managers having to stay up at night worrying about, well, will I be over budget? Will I run behind schedule? We can allay those fears. And moreover, the organizations that they work for, contract research organizations, are typically groups that research is outsourced to. And so in their case, by being able to attack the cost drivers for their contracts, they have an option to either bid more aggressively to win business or to bid at a similar level and take a higher margin. So there's direct operational benefits as well as financial benefits for the paying organizations. Now, this value proposition does unlock a large and growing market. There's currently just under 10,000 trials operating in the US, and they spend collectively about $21 billion on data quality. We think that we can save close to $7 billion in today's money, and of that, charge about 15% in terms of savings. Now, one neat feature of clinical trials is that there's certain aspects that are similar between all trials, really that kind of core regulatory component, and then there's variation across individual projects. We're really geared to handle both of those aspects of the clinical research system, and in so doing, have a highly addressable market. So really, there's not any limits in terms of what kind of a study our platform could support. The market is also highly discoverable. Thanks to federal law, if you're doing human subjects research in the US, you have to register on clinicaltrials.gov. And so for us, we can use that as a tool to generate leads, figure out who's working with who, and drive people into our sales funnel. So we do have a SaaS business model. I mentioned that this research happens across a lot of different hospitals. And so the way that we set this up is to charge an individual trial a fee on a monthly basis for every hospital that's participating. So it scales really nicely with the complexity of these studies, lets them come in earlier in the pipeline and support the later stage studies as well. Because you're working across sites and research teams, there's individual use cases for both, and there's opportunities for awareness where a user at the site might see the system and say, gosh, that's so much easier, why aren't we using that on the other studies? And then we do target organizations that do a lot of research in parallel. So really one of our goals is to upsell within an organization as opposed to focusing on getting a lot of new customers in parallel. We want to grow to consume an entire research portfolio. So this pipeline has come about from our business development. We met with more than 30 users and decision makers from more than 10 well-respected research organizations and went and did design studies with them to look at how are you actually processing this data, how are you bringing it into your system, how are you communicating it to the sponsor to make sure that we had a product that met user needs. Naturally, that created a lot of interest in actually using the system, and so we're working on getting some pilots. We have 2 pilots signed, one with the site and one with the contract research organization. So we're very excited to be moving into that. I'm going to mostly skip the demo. This is just a way to get a sense of what the system looks like. So instead of having an individual binder for every patient on a study, we have containers for everything, as well as the administrative study documents. Now, we do have a little bit of competition in this space. There's kind of a Dropbox compliant regulatory compliant Dropbox clone, but our system has workflows that really align with how clinical trials are structured, not just a compliant folder system that you can put documents into. I mostly skipped the demo because this is the slide that I'm really excited about. We have an incredible team. We're all here today. And we joined basically a lot of subject matter expertise, both myself on the research side, as well as our CTO, having worked at Epic, bringing a lot of knowledge in terms of the EHR space. We were incorporated back in April, and we've been full-time since May of this year. And what's really great about this team, what's just amazed me, is that in that span of time, we've been able to take their expertise in building these kinds of products and go from a concept for a regulatory compliant enterprise SaaS solution and build it in about 6 months. That's really based on the skills that they gained working together previously at a company called Aperture, which was ultimately acquired by IMS Health. So they were early employees there, and their roles at that company really led to a lot of its success. So we're all first-time founders, but I myself had a lot of experience as an entrepreneur building out the research infrastructure at my previous company. We didn't really have any ability to do a study, so I had to create that from the ground up. So that was a lot of internal organization building, and then the rest of the team has worked at startups before at a very early stage and really contributed to that success. So in terms of projections, this is a somewhat conservative look at what we expect here. Our main KPI over the next few years is really going to be same customer growth. The goal behind that is really to control the ratio of that customer acquisition cost versus the lifetime value. We want customers to do a lot of projects, and so we're going to focus our expansion on that and conservatively expect to be able to obtain these revenues. I want to close by saying thank you to SAC. This has been a wonderful experience. We would love to get your vote this year, and it'd be an honor to represent you. Thank you.
So I'm Adam Glass. I led the due diligence team for Invio. The other parts of my team were Sanjay and Swaroop. We got a little bit of help from SAF. So the overall impression that we got from Invio was that we thought they had a strong team with both domain expertise combined with enterprise class engineering talent and targeted at an enterprise class business. We thought that was very appealing. The other thing is that when we were talking to Invio, one always got the impression that it was a very thoughtful team, both in terms of the team, the advisors, the process, their engineering, their customer focus. We really felt that this was a team that made decisions based on the long-term value of that customer, long-term value of the product. So, we did a full due diligence pass on Invio, but areas that we focused included. So Invio is a little weird in the sense that they have 4 founders with equal shares, and we were kind of curious how that was supposed to work. And we learned that they basically had a tiebreaker scheme involving a virtual baton that was used to resolve the potential conflict.
You promised us a real baton if we win.
Yes, I did. This is true. This is true. So the other thing we wondered about is, frankly, this is kind of one of those spaces where you're like, but isn't it just sort of document storage, right? If for HIPAA, and you're like, how backward could this space be when that isn't enough? And it turns out actually it is that backward a space. This is healthcare. Healthcare is regulated, and they spend a long time moving forward in technology. So we built our own picture of what this market looked like, and we came up with a picture that was very much like Invio's, where we were able to see that, look, there's an actual product need here that these people fit. It's a niche, but it's a nice niche, and there's money in it. And that was very appealing to us. And we were able to validate that, that space existed. From a customer validation perspective, one of the things we wondered about is like, well, so are there people who want to pay for this, right? And so we cold mailed a bunch of people and said, hey, would you pay for a service that makes this problem that you have go away or reduce its cost? And we did actually have somebody tell us, first of all, we had a couple people respond and say, yeah, I would. And we actually had somebody say, look, I want to spend a bit of an FTE, basically a full-time employee, paying for this so I can have that FTE work on something more important to my business. The other question we had about Invio is, this is enterprise sales, so we were wondering, are they going to have the burn, are they going to burn too fast before they get enough customers to make this work? And we took their model, we took our model, and we worked it out, and they got enough time. We think they should, based on the way they're doing their engineering, we think it's likely they'll be able to sell product and survive that transition. In terms of remaining questions, for Dema, sales pipeline. How's Invio going to build a sales pipeline beyond your personal network of the founding team?
Sure. So we have a long way to go before we tap out our personal network. I'll just say that. But to go beyond that, clinicaltrials.gov, as I mentioned during the presentation, is a really great opportunity to discover potential customers, and often there's contact information associated with that. So there's cold calling there. The other thing that's nice about it being a niche industry is that they tend to coalesce around a few institutional industry groups. For example, Association of Clinical Research Professionals, Organization for Regulatory and Clinical Associates, Society of Clinical Research Associates. You get the idea. There's a few of these that maintain credentialing and other sorts of features for the industry. And I've actually spoken at the recent half-day education event as a kind of subject matter expert on risk-based monitoring, which drives a lot of the impetus behind this product. So those sorts of speaking engagements are another really great way to drive business. So cold calling, jaws again.
Okay. So I guess one last question in my last minute of talking. There's a concern in this space that there's lots of standards, and some of those standards are fairly bad. How much integration with proprietary and/or bad standards are you going to have to do? How much is that going to increase your sales cost, your ability to get customers?
Yeah. So I think that question is driving towards the standards for electronic health record system interoperability, which right now is pretty weak. Need is a strong word, and we could absolutely sell an enterprise product without any EHR integration capability. That said, there are some clients for whom that is a real pain point, and they would like to see that. So in those cases, we would handle this on a professional services basis, or maybe for a couple of the heavy hitting sites, focus on that until a better interoperability standard is instituted. Right now, there's a new standard called FHIR that's in beta that will be coming out probably later next year, and in that case, we would be positioned to integrate with that. So to a certain extent, the EHR integration piece is not now question, but a future positioning question, because we see that in 5 years, we think that that's going to be a huge component of the industry. So we want Invio to have brand awareness, document management workflows, so we'll be in position to capitalize on that when the time comes.